Okay, welcome friends. I'm Dr. Prashad Nasa, intensivist at NMC Hospital, Dubai. And today I will be the moderator for the session. So today we have a very important session on the role of corticosteroids in COVID-19, when to use and when not to be used. We know now there is a well-established role of a dysregulated immune response in the pathophysiology of a severe COVID-19. Systemic immunomodulators like corticosteroids have been found the only effective, rather I should say only effective medicine so far, which has been found to have a survival benefit in COVID-19 patients. At the same time, corticosteroids, as we understand, are like a double-edged swords. Despite well-conducted recovery trial and meta-analysis, which came from World Health Organization on the 7 subsequent trials with the name as REACT, there were few questions which are still unanswered. I think there is still some confusion regarding the timing, the dose, and the duration of corticosteroids, or if there is any role of a pulse corticosteroid or a higher dose of corticosteroids in management of COVID-19. So we will be taking these questions. Today we have a very elite panelist. We have Dr. Mohan Gurjar, we have Dr. R.K. Mani, Dr. Banambar Ray, Dr. Jiggy Divatia, Dr. Narendra Untasar, and Dr. Shrushta Bandyopadhyay. Along with we will be having Dr. B.K. Rao and Dr. Mayank when they will be joining with us. So we'll start with without any further delay. I will go with Dr. Mani. So what do you think the role of systemic corticosteroids in COVID-19? Dr. Mani.
Of course, as you said, it's the only life-saving drug.
Yep.
Only one showing survival benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest have, efficacy on the duration of illness and recovery, the rate of recovery. And they are also very few. And so the issue is of the timing of steroid, because we have always grown up all through our career in having this ambivalent relationship with steroids in critical illness. We knew that they are life-saving in a certain subset of patients, although that even was controversial all these 25, 30 years. So timing is very important, because if you are using it in the mild cases, then you may be doing harm, actual harm, by perpetuating the viral colonization and invasion and delaying the shedding, delaying the completion of shedding, therefore the infectivity. At the same time, when we delay treatment when the fire is on, then again it can be detrimental. So the gray area, the fine area between when it is going to harm and when it is going to benefit, that has been defined by the recovery trial. Recovery trial clearly show that in critical illness, in severe pneumonia, those on mechanical ventilators, it has a maximum efficacy on saving lives. And also in the moderate illness to a less extent, moderate ARDS. So what is happening now is we are not looking at the severity of ARDS. We are tending to use it in mild ARDS. We have started to believe that COVID is something special. There is an exceptionalism about COVID, and we have stopped learning from all the past researches on steroid therapy in ARDS. So I would say, as far as the timing is concerned, you must wait for at least oxygen desaturation, and you should hold back until then.
Thank you, sir. So, Dr. Divatia, do you agree? Is the oxygen requirement the only criteria to decide about use of corticosteroids in COVID?
So, if you go by the data from the recovery trial, it is oxygen requirement, because in patients who did not require oxygen, there was a signal towards actually a worse outcome. Okay, and if you look at the pathophysiology of the whatever we understand, and that's not complete, but what we think we know today is that the first few days, the first 5 to 8 days, is the phase of viral replication, and that's when you got the virus which is multiplying inside you. At this time, if you give corticosteroids, you're possibly causing harm because you're suppressing immunity, which will allow the virus to multiply further. It is in the subsequent phase after about 8 days to 15 days or whatever is where the inflammatory response, if it is going out of control, that needs to be dampened. And that is the time you need to give steroids. So the recovery trial actually showed two things. One is those who got oxygen and those who did not get oxygen. There was a clear difference between the two. And it was even more effective, like Dr. Mani pointed out, in those who are ventilated. Presumably, these patients had an even higher inflammatory response, and therefore steroids worked better in those patients. But the oxygen requirement and the timing were also sort of linked, So many of the patients who got oxygen were 9 days plus into their disease. So maybe you can look at oxygen requirement as a very good endpoint. And 9 days of disease or 7 days of disease, it's a little soft endpoint because, a soft criterion, because no one can exactly pinpoint when the symptoms started. In many patients, we just don't know. And some patients just come with a positive RT-PCR because they had a contact with someone. So you don't really know when your disease started. But I think for all practical purposes, I would go with what Dr. Mani says, that the moment you start requiring a significant amount, more than just start requiring oxygen, that's when you should start thinking of steroids.
Thank you, sir. Welcome, Dr. Rao, sir. Dr. Rao.
Thank you.
Basically, it's the first question which we started with, the timing of the corticosteroid, and I think that is still a little gray area because recovery trial clearly says the patient when require an oxygen has a survival benefit, while the patients who did not require oxygen, they in fact has a little non-significant higher mortality in their outcome. But the issue is they did not specify when the patient actually were started on oxygen, because there is a difference in two definition of severity, while from a World Health Organization versus the Chinese CDC, which came up with an initial definition of 94% versus 90%. So that word severe gets a little complicated when you are talking about of a Chinese CDC classification versus a World Health Organization, which says 90% or less is severe disease. So do you agree a severe disease is the only criteria, or we can have a patient who is less than 94% can be started on corticosteroids despite not having on oxygen?
See, the aim that we are trying to do is we don't want the patient to be admitted. We don't want the patient after admission to become from mild to moderate to severe. The second thing we don't want is him to come to the ICU. We don't want him developing ARDS. We don't want him on ventilator, and we don't want him to die. Exactly. So if in this paradigm, if in this timeline that we see, the thing that classifies or distinguishes between mild and moderate is the oxygen levels. And we all know that if there is a lung involvement, if there are pulmonary infiltrates, then oxygen level will start getting affected. And that, I agree, is the time when you should start the corticosteroids.
I think that's a little difference of opinion, but I fully agree. There is a definitive role when there is a steroid which has to be given a patient who is requiring significant amount of oxygen, and that's the point where the recovery trial has shown benefit. I will come to Dr. Rungta, sir. Sir, do you agree? Is there a role of the 6-minute walk test or other parameters to assess a decompensation before actually patient requiring an oxygen, or you can use steroid looking at these tests, though there is no evidence so far?
No, you see, I think there is a little bit of confusion about this 6 minutes walk test. This is a definite test to test the compensatory abilities of the lungs and heart in times of increased oxygen demand. So if we feel that COVID effect is being subjugated or is not coming to the fore, and if you want to expose it in a patient who might be resting and still suffering from, we had been talking about happy hypoxia, etc., etc. So there is a case where you think the patient may be having hypoxia but is not exhibiting, and then you can subject him to 6-minute walk test. But that's not the essential criteria for checking hypoxia in a patient. So that's an additional test when you want to elicit the hidden hypoxic status of a patient and expose lungs and heart to some additional demands. That's one. Number two, the timings, you see, is now very well established. When should we start oxygen? Dr. Mani, Dr. Jiggy, and Dr. Rao, even everybody says so, and we practice the same. But however, I say Dr. Rao had a case when he was saying prevent hospitalization, prevent from SDU to ICU. We should keep this, recovery trial has been one, and we have been given one direction. And we have one established direction that when we should actually initiate, and that's a teaching point as well to everybody, to students. But there is a separate topic, that is a topic of research and further exploration. Where can we even have better application of these drugs which are life savings? So we should definitely collect data at individual level, at institutional level, at society level, that if early use of steroids in a case where there is a rapid fall of oxygen levels and we want to prevent hospitalization, does that help? I'm not saying it helps. So there is a case for keeping our minds open to early use of steroids in patients where we are quite skeptical about whether the patient has mild to moderate disease or is landing or is expected to land into severe disease. And we can reduce number of patients reaching to the hospital. I'm not saying, again, I'm trying to emphasize that I'm not saying that it is indicated, but that can be a topic of research.
Another question, which is to Dr. Gurjar, any role of CT scan? Dr. Gurjar, any role of CT scan to decide steroid? Because these are the questions which are going to come as from the panel, the people, what they are doing on the ground level. So we would need to address these things which are happening. People are just jumping onto corticosteroids by many reasons. This, just not looking at the oxygen, like CT scan, and another thing was 6-minute walk test. So do you agree CT scan has a role?
Before commenting on that, going for the CT scan, I will say again, emphasis the clinical criteria should be the top above the radiological criteria. Definitely, because it is a very well correlated with the clinical conditions of the patients. It's not only the oxygen level, but otherwise also dyspnea on exertion, or maybe 6-minute walk test, whatever you do unmasking the respiratory reserve. So CT scan is not a very much essential, number one. Then timing is also important because the disease is a kinetic process. It is not static, and you can't go for repeating the CT images. Just for the long term or just prognostications, you may consider for the CT only in the hospitalized patient. No need for non-hospitalized patient at all. The clinical criteria should be the first, and avoid the CT scan. Yeah.
So the important message is we should not start steroid early. The mild disease is definitely we should not consider steroid, and in fact there is a risk of harm. There may be different types of harms which have been demonstrated even with the recovery trial, while delay clearance of the virus itself. There is a procoagulation which happens with steroid. So all that can harm. So definitely there is a risk of harm while starting steroid in a mild disease. While in moderate to severe disease, an oxygen is a very useful clinical criteria which can help to decide corticosteroids. Almost all of us agree on that point. In some subgroup of patients, looking at the clinical monitoring, maybe if you are using a 6-minute walk test or other test, but yes, the role of corticosteroid in these subgroup of patients has not been proven so far. And I think it's something which is of a future research. So at present, the definitive indication is a patient who has been started on oxygen should be given a corticosteroid. So the next question is to Dr. Sushruta. What is the role of different type of steroids, dexamethasone, methylprednisolone, or hydrocortisone? It doesn't matter. Do you believe any advantage of one over the other?
Basically, you should go into that recovery. Recovery is a huge trial, and you use dexamethasone. That's no question about that. But there is one, you have seen this, you have mentioned, there is a meta-analysis and systemic review, which showed some 3,000 odd patients in several trials. And there they showed the commonest drug which was used was methylprednisolone among these studies. I think almost more than 50% of the trials, hospitals, they chose methylprednisolone. The doses were different, it varied. Maximum dose even was mentioned was 500 milligram once a day or something like that. Common dose was 1 milligram per kg once or twice daily as per the severity, and that was the commonest use. Whether dexamethasone and methylprednisolone are different, whether one is better than other, it's a question of conjecture. In my hospital, we prefer methylprednisolone. Sorry, but then I think dexamethasone, given again dexamethasone recovery used at 6 milligram once daily dose, but again not in COVID. But if you put in that Dextra ARDS trial, you can go up to say 10 milligram twice daily or 20 milligram of dexamethasone in considering that these are severe ARDS trial. Perhaps we feel that patients who are really seriously ill in a very severe ARDS should be doing better with a higher dose of steroid. That might be our bias, but that's what we feel. And
we will be coming to that, sir. We will be coming to that. Dr. Ray,
and,
do you have?
And I think it is the choice. You can use dexamethasone or methylprednisolone. Hydrocortisone in that discussion, I think it has not been shown to be that effective. Possibly hydrocortisone is not an effective steroid in this situation. People can choose between dexamethasone and methylprednisolone.
Dr. Ray, do you want to add, sir, anything on that?
You know, dexamethasone, I used to give it, I think, until about a month and a half ago. And dexamethasone was doing quite all right. But in certain cases, when the inflammatory markers are going on the rise, you can't actually increase dexamethasone, right? You can maximum give about 6 milligram twice a day, but beyond which you cannot give. So therefore, methylprednisolone, we started using it. And I don't use tocilizumab and all those stuff. I don't actually believe it. I have used it only once. So I try to manage this cytokine excitation syndrome with methylprednisolone. So methylprednisolone, now I have started using it, and to good results. Initially, you can actually give it maybe sometimes 250 milligram twice a day, but 2 days later we come down. Dexamethasone, you can't do it.
So sorry to interrupt. We will be coming to higher dose. We will be coming to the dose.
Okay.
Right now
so you could manipulate the doses with methylprednisolone perhaps better than with dexamethasone. So otherwise, dexamethasone, I think large majority of cases do quite well. Very severe cases with high inflammatory markers, I think dexamethasone will fall short.
Dr. Rao, sir, any difference in opinion? Do you think anything is better in terms of choice of steroid between Dexa, methylprednisolone, or hydrocortisone?
No, the only thing I wanted to add was that cost of methylprednisolone is much higher than Dexa now.
Otherwise, we can use either of them.
Otherwise, you can use either of them.
And the continuation on the same thing, as Dr. Ray said, at some situations, methylprednisolone work better. Is that so? Do you believe also the same thing, or we can switch off two different steroids in the same patient?
We don't give a higher dose. If need be, we will go for the tocilizumab. And we do not believe in switching between methylprednisolone and Dexona.
Okay, I will be coming to Dr. Mani. Any role of inhalational corticosteroids in COVID, sir?
Yes, of course. I think budesonide inhalation have reduced hospitalization and progression, according to recent studies in UK. But of course, a small cohort of patients, it's only about 200 patients. The dose is higher. You have to have 800 microgram twice daily. I think that makes sense. It is not only for the previous asthmatics who have been on inhalation, but also for just those people who have had COVID without any background asthmatic illness. On the subject of the different steroids, I don't think there is evidence to say that for equivalent doses, they are any different in efficacy. All right. And then we do run out of dexamethasone, off the market and all. So there is no depression. We can use whatever is available. And lastly, I must say that the dosage that was recommended by meta-analysis in the background before COVID, appearance of COVID, all the Meduri studies and everything, they've all been done on methylprednisolone. And meta-analysis by Villar and others in Spanish meta-analysis, that also has about, I think there are 70 studies or something, and there all kinds of steroids have been used, including hydrocortisone. Hydrocortisone we are seeing being used in other critical illness also for shock and other things. So I'm not sure whether they are any different. Whether their difference in mineralocorticoid, glucocorticoid effects impact on the actual outcomes. I'm not aware.
And WHO says in their meta-analysis and their living guidance, it's more of a class effect rather than per se an individual dose effect. I also feel the same. There is no difference, but still probably we have much more higher experience with the methylprednisolone, and that's one of the reason. I think the old practices are there to use methylprednisolone for ARDS, though the evidence is very good for both dexamethasone and methylprednisolone. So at present, we can say that we can use either of the two steroids in the equivalent doses, and there is no much difference to say unless proven in some other good quality studies. So coming to Dr. Rungta, so what is your suggested dose for corticosteroid, or rather I should say, what is the preferred dose you will go for a corticosteroid in COVID-19 patients?
Prashant, we can use high dose corticosteroids only for research purposes. There have been number of trials, and the best quoted trial about use of high dose steroids has been by Eric and al., which was published last year in European Journal of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. And they have clearly demonstrated the mortality was high. And there was another trial which had to be stopped in between because it was not showing any advantage. On the contrary, the patients were having more of these hyper-inflammatory manifestations, or if you want to call it cytokine storm, with higher use of higher dose of steroids. So higher dose of steroids should be reserved only for research purposes at present in selected subset of patients. In routine, I think it may be too early to perpetuate or promote use of higher dose steroids of any kind, whether methylprednisolone or hydrocortisone. Recovery trial and WHO and CDC, all the three organizations, even NIH and even the ESIACM, they all advocate dexamethasone is the prototype 6 milligram, and or equivalent of methylprednisolone, which comes to around 32 milligram, or prednisolone, which comes to around 40 milligram, and hydrocortisone to about 150 milligram. So they have said when one is not available, you can use another, with probably expecting this similar outcome or efficacy.
Dr. Gurjar, do you have any other opinion on this? What's your preferred dose for most of the patients, and do you use higher dose like 2 to 2.5 milligram of equivalent of methylprednisolone for some patients?
So the higher dose, the good evidence is not enough available. Yes, low dose, like non-COVID sepsis, we use around 200 to 300 milligram of hydrocortisone. That come equal to the almost 6 milligram of your dexamethasone. So that is being preferred and started and used in that recovery trial. So yes, I am going back to some 2-3 lines about the cytokine storm. Cytokine storm is a normal physiological response, and it is a very difficult to distinct between the normal inflammatory response and when it goes towards a dysregulated. Ultimately, dysregulated will damage to your organs. So in that, like need of oxygen, it is a damage to the organ basically. So in that case, you need an anti-inflammatory action. Then for the bedside clinician, how to monitor the cytokine storm basically, it is not only the inflammatory marker, it is also to change in the systemic inflammatory response syndrome, SIRS, earlier we used for the sepsis definition, as well as the organ damage you can easily measure through your SOFA score. So if you use, it's not only the your increase in the biomarkers, inflammatory markers, also you have to look for the change in the SIRS, vitals, as well as your ongoing organ damage. In that cases, yes, there is you can individualize the patient thinking going for the higher steroid.
Dr. Sushruta, do you agree that we can replace higher dose of corticosteroids if there is a non-availability of a tocilizumab?
No, I don't think they are interchangeable.
They're-
Basically, the steroid should be used dexamethasone if you go by recovery 6 milligram. If you want to juxtapose the results of Dextra-ARDS, you can put 10 twice daily, 20 or once daily, whatever it is, 20 milligram daily for 5 days and then reduce to 10. And otherwise, methylprednisolone either 1 milligram once daily, 1 milligram per kg once daily, or 1 milligram per kg twice daily. That's the max. Rest, the bigger, higher doses, I don't think they're detrimental and they're unproven. And that is not a ersatz for this tocilizumab.
Dr. Ray, sir.
Well, as I indicated a little earlier, that I don't use tocilizumab. Only once I have used it, and I'm quite scared. And my friends have used it, and they have ended up in bad results. So I do not use, and I try to control this cytokine excitation syndrome by a pulse kind of methylprednisolone, and then I come down in a day or two to the original level. And that's what in many situations it does bring down IL-6, does bring down the CRP from hundreds to less than 100. And that is what I'm satisfied with. So I wouldn't use tocilizumab even now.
Dr. Jiggy, Dr. Devatia, sir.
Yeah, so let me put it this way. So Mohan spoke about the cytokine response.
Yeah.
Cytokine or the inflammatory response is beneficial by and large. So I think just because a patient, if you're measuring X level or CRP or X cytokine or Y cytokine, just because it is high, is not a response to try to suppress it. You have to suppress it if there is a clinical deterioration which you can attribute to the cytokine response, which probably is little going out of control. Okay. So if a patient does not have pulmonary involvement, doesn't have organ dysfunction, and just has fever or something, I don't think it's a good reason to immediately start a steroid. And by saying that, oh, because my IL-6 is high or my CRP is so high, I will prevent further deterioration by giving steroid, I don't think makes sense, at least to me. In fact, if the cytokine response being so high has prevented the patient from getting worse, it's probably protecting the patient, and dampening it may actually cause harm. So we have to be a little careful when we go purely by, because our understanding of the cytokine response is not great. We say cytokine storm in COVID-19, but the cytokine levels that you get in measure in COVID-19 are far lower than what you got in our old conventional ARDS. Okay, so although they are high, they're not that high. And so that's about whether to give a steroid without pulmonary damage. High dose or low dose. Now, the best evidence, of course, is the recovery trial, which is 6 milligrams. And it seems to work even in very sick patients because the outcomes were better in patients who were ventilated. So presumably they had more inflammation, more damaged lungs, and the results were better with 6 milligrams. So 6 milligrams should be adequate. Having said that, there is a case for giving higher doses because the Dexa-ARDS trial was there, where they used 20 milligrams.
Yeah, Professor Sheila is, I think, part of that.
Yeah, so that's a trial, and we are doing a study where we are
part of
trying 6 versus 12.
Yeah.
But that's still in the research phase. I don't think we can straight away say that we should use higher doses. There is a temptation to use higher doses because patients are sick, or you're seeing a lot of sick patients, you're seeing a lot of patients with sick lungs. But if you ask me, no, people say, oh, no, this time lots of lungs are getting fired and all. I think it's just the proportion of lungs that are getting fired is the same. It's just that the number of patients is very high this time. So let's say earlier 5% of lungs were getting fired, earlier it was 5% of 1,000, now it's 5% of 10,000. So suddenly you're seeing a whole lot of patients. So there's no need to panic. And the response of worse is not necessarily more steroid. It may. So now, as far as if tocilizumab is not there, whether pulse steroid will work, it's a matter of pure conjecture. Your guess is as good as mine. And I don't really have an answer to that. But by and large, before recovery came in, our standard was 40 BD of methylpred, okay, which is actually about more than double of what comes from recovery, right? It's almost equivalent to 12 milligram, more than 12 to 15 milligrams of dexamethasone. That was our standard. Now we've come down to 6, and I don't think we are doing badly. So that's this thing. So that's a long answer to a short question. Is that?
Thank you, sir. I think that summarizes very well. The evidence which is the best is so far is 6 milligram of dexamethasone, and once daily. For that will be discussion part. too. But yes, 6 milligram is the right dose of dexamethasone or equivalent of other steroid. As we discussed, there is not much difference in the class. The role of higher steroid at present is still, under research. And as we see that there are some subset, but at present out of research, we should not try a higher dose, more than 6 milligram. But also a pulse dose is definitely, which is, out of a clinical trial is something, and as a replacement of tocilizumab is something which can be very risky. So it's important to use those things only if you are doing as a part of a clinical research. Other than that, to recommend is 6 milligram of dexamethasone is sufficient for most of the patients. So I will go to the
Prashant,
next.
I have a little quick rejoinder.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Quick rejoinder to this.
Yeah, sir. I was about
You
to
see,
complete on that.
the issue is, cytokine storm is a very woolly term. Because I thought whatever critical illness is happening is for some form of hyperimmune response, and septic response is hyperimmune response. So we have not been able to define what the cytokine storm specific to COVID is and how it is different. And as Jiggy pointed out, in the classical ARDS, you have IL-6 in the thousands. This is barely hundreds. That is one point. Secondly, we have had enough research on steroids in ARDS since the late 80s. In the late 80s, we had pulse steroid therapy, which failed miserably. And after that, the controversy has raged all through these 2 decades. And Meduri is one fellow who has been advocating. The issue is the doses that Meduri has recommended are 1 to 2 milligram per kg of methylprednisolone, not higher than this. So all that research has been, and we want an immunomodulatory dose. As Jiggy has said, we don't want an immunosuppressive dose. It's got a lot of problems. And people have worked out the immunomodulatory dose. We know what the stress response dose is. Stress dose we know. We know what the immunomodulatory dose. We have an idea. We don't have that accurate an idea. So to assume that there is a cytokine response syndrome in COVID, which is different from usual septic response, and it will need an immunosuppressive dose, I think that itself has to be questioned. And that's why tocilizumab is also in question. Tocilizumab is also under.
Prashant, one small question or maybe an observation. You see, the guidelines always say that methylprednisolone is weight-based, so this much milligram per kg. And at the end, it says, or an equivalent dose of dexamethasone. But dexamethasone is a flat, it's one single dose. So how does it become an equivalent?
That's an observation. But
that's a good question.
That's a good question. But if you see this as the last major RCT which came in last year itself in non-COVID ARDS also, they used 20 milligram in the Spanish trial which came in January 2020. In non-COVID ARDS, they used 20 milligram for 5 days and followed by 10 milligram for 5 days. So that comes to almost the same dose, 1 to 2 milligram of methylprednisolone. But somehow, yes, I agree with you. That's a good.
I'm talking of the government guidelines.
Yeah, the government guidelines. Why they?
That is how they spell it. I don't know what do they mean by that?
There is a confusion in that particular part, and in fact, the next question was about that.
Prashant, just one thing. We should also clarify that dexamethasone can be given both oral and IV.
I think we will come to you only at that part because the next question is on that only. Yeah. And despite whatever we say as an expert and as a recommendation working in intensive care, there are still many patients who have been started on corticosteroids before ICU and in the community. If those patients come to you, what do you do if they are still worsening and coming to your ICU? So what exactly you do for those patients? Do you increase the steroid? You continue with the same dose, or you change that type to another one?
This is a great question, Prashant, and not very easy to address. But the easiest way to handle is to forget what has happened earlier and treat the patient on merits at the time of presentation. So you cannot respect the information that you have got from the patient or from the prescription that he is carrying. But what you are presented with, the condition of the patient at the time of presentation, is the best evidence, best case scenario that you are facing. And I would react only to that. So if the patient has presented to me with hypoxia and I am to start on oxygen or ventilate him, definitely I will start dexamethasone on him as day 1.
Will there be a difference of oral or IV in that case?
No, no, I will, if the patient can take orally, I will give orally. If the patient cannot take orally, I will give IV, but single dose. And my criteria would be 10 days dexamethasone or hospital discharge, whatever comes early.
As what recommended by a recovery trial.
Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah,
So
Dr. Shishrata,
I'm very clear about it. No confusion.
thank you, sir. Dr. Shishrata, do you want to say something extra than this? How long that corticosteroid should be used? The 10 days is sufficient for almost every patient, or do you differ with that? In some patients, maybe a longer
We
duration.
generally in our ICU, we stick to 10 days. Very exceptional cases where the patient is very ill, we have not find out a secondary cause, a sepsis excluded, CT scan doesn't show anything special, no pulmonary embolism. There we sometimes, we are scared to take out the steroid, and sometimes it goes up to say 15 days or something like that sometimes. But we generally, most of the patients, we stick to 10 days protocol.
Dr. Mohan, any difference of opinion on that?
Yes, we don't know. We don't have evidence for that duration of, because the largest recovery trial they use for the 10 days maximum or discharge from the hospital. So involvement, it is we can't club all the COVID severity in the single for how many days, and the severity may be differ. The long term nobody know. And like a non-COVID ARDS, there are some evidences through the meta-analysis also that 2 to 4 weeks. So we don't know. I can't recommend right now. I can't say anything right now. Maybe in the cases of the severe ARDS, maybe it is a beneficial if you use for 2 to 4 weeks, but that has to come through the evidences. Yes,
Dr.
10
Ray?
days is good.
10 days is.
Yeah, definitely.
Dr. Ray? Yeah. Dr. Ray?
Yeah, no, what I do is I give it for about 7 days and then I start tapering, which continues for another 9 days. So therefore, it's about 17, 18 days, and I look after these patients in the ward also. So by the time, if it is, 15, 16 days, generally they are off steroids. Otherwise, I give oral steroids to cover up those, 3 or 4 days extra to make it about 17, 18 days altogether. So that is what. But if a patient continues to be in the ICU, then I continue the intravenous again for 7-8 days. I change to the oral or the nasogastric tablets, and then again I start tapering while the patient is in the ICU. I don't continue beyond maximum 20 days or 21 days.
Dr. Mani, any difference of opinion on that, or just 10 days and maybe? And
See,
first
here
is
again,
duration.
I'll divide into those people who are on ventilator and you're giving steroids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the research we have on this is the Steinberg-ARDSNet trial, where it showed that, in the arm where they discontinued abruptly, right, post extubation, their protocol said after 48 hours you stop. Those people did badly. So, the very severe ones, we should taper. I agree with the number. We should taper rather than stop abruptly in this subset of patients. But if it's a moderate one we are seeing, where, according to recovery, you can abruptly stop at day 10. You can 5 days, you give 6 milligrams, then you give a lower dose, next 5 days, and you stop. There are some subset of patients, not all, where there's a simmering alveolitis stage, as with any ARD. You may have a bronchiolitis obliterans and organizing pneumonia, COP, syndrome also in a subset of patients. That has been proven through biopsy, lung biopsies, and all that in several cases, studies. So in that subset, you may have a simmering low-grade fever, and you may have persistent, pneumonic shadow rather than, fibrotic shadow. There you may need to give much more. You may need to taper over weeks. So that also we should recognize. There are many people who've been transferred to our unit when there is a continued requirement of steroid. That also happens when people have returned after being discharged with hypoxia. So how you identify that subset, that's a challenge. I agree with you. So we have to go from case to case. One glove doesn't fit all. That's what we saw in the ARDSNet study. they gave blanket steroids to everybody without identifying the subset. That is where the Meduri studies differ. They identify, and where you give 1 milligram is in the first week, and you give 2 milligram, and there's persistence beyond 1 week. So they have divided like that. So that research also we can integrate into the COVID related ARVs.
Dr. Rao, sir, any role of inflammatory markers or CT to decide longer duration of corticosteroids? As Dr. Manish said, basically there are some subset of patients who may have requirement for a longer duration. Do we add up CT or inflammatory markers to that information?
Just to add to what Dr. Mani said, it is not only COP, the patient may be on steroid for many other medical reasons. So all those reasons have to be taken into account. But talking of the CT scan finding, unless we are looking for something very specific, CT is not indicated. And as far as the markers are concerned, again, even if the markers are high and the patient is not symptomatic, then let it be so. Then we don't continue with steroids.
So most of the patients work very well with the 10 days of dexamethasone or any equivalent steroid. Only in subset of patient which has to be identified specifically with a joint decision to do a longer duration of corticosteroids, and as such a weaning criteria is a better as compared to abrupt discontinuation. That's what all experts agree in the group. So coming to another important part is superadded infections. You know, it's a big area which is coming up, and I think there is where opinion is required. So Dr. Divatia, because you're working in oncology setup, so mucormycosis is, I think you are the best expert. So how much you are seeing a difference before COVID and after COVID, and what are the factors which are contributing to it?
So Prashant, I am working in oncology center, and I think based on what I read in the newspapers, I'm the least qualified to speak on this subject because I've not seen any mucor so far. Okay, even before even though we're dealing with neutropenic hematological malignancies, our aspergillus was a definite pathogen, but mucor was very, very rare. In fact, in the trial of isovuconazole, which happened, we could not recruit a single patient of mucor. We were part of the trial. You know, we recruited patients with aspergillosis, invasive aspergillosis. Even now, we are not seeing mucor. Okay, and I asked our oncologists whether they are seeing mucor on the wards, you know, or on follow-up, and they are also not seen yet. So we'll touch wood on that. But I think one thing is, I suspect, is that patients are getting far too much steroid, and they're getting far too high a dose, because a lot of people believe in pulse steroids. A lot of people believe in even 40 mg BD for 4 weeks is a lot of steroid. Although we call it a conventional dose, it's actually quite a large dose. And just in the previous question, sometimes when patients become hypoxic after coming off, say after 2 or 3 days, I've even started them on 10 or 20 milligrams of prednisolone, which is one and a half of the equivalent of 6 milligrams of dexamethasone, half or even 1/4. And that seems to work in some patients. Now, again, it's anecdotal. But so coming to super infections, we've not seen mucor. I suspect what is contributing is prolonged high-dose steroids. Diabetes, of course, uncontrolled diabetes seems to be a very important risk factor. And maybe, I think these are the two main ones, and broad-spectrum antibiotics, all together. Because a lot of broad-spectrum antibiotics are being prescribed in the community, in the hospitals, and that's probably all contributing. The Fungal Society of India has just released a statement today, their guidelines or statement, and they do not believe that oxygen cannulae and oxygen water and all is responsible for mucor. That's not that's not part of the pathogenesis of mucormycosis. So I think could very largely be related to what we are doing. Plus, there may be some immunomodulatory effects that COVID itself is having, which is allowing mucor to somehow take root in the nasal passages. Whether it's related to lots of nasal, steam inhalation or this or that, we are not sure at all. But all I can say from my experience is that we've not yet seen mucor. We've seen aspergillus, but not much more because of COVID than what we used to see in other patients.
Dr. Gurjar, anything?
Yes.
Do you have seen mucor first of all, and or maybe
No.
any superadded infections in these patients
No,
other
no,
than standard
not
bacterial?
not mucor, but as a general superadded infection.
Mhm.
So I would summarize in few words, it is a suboptimal critical care. That is, we are having the more infection in this COVID patients who are admitted in the ICU. It is like a care from that. Nobody's care the hygiene, indwelling catheters, and while connecting the IV drip set, something is going down, touching somewhere and connecting the same thing. That environment is a very bad. And yes, drug related, steroid, blood sugar, though whatever you say, so many hours you have to follow the blood sugar monitoring, nobody is doing actually. So much less manpower and nursing staff in everywhere, I feel so. So many times they are just fudging the things. That is true. It's a pandemic crisis. Nobody can deny. And another thing, yes, like Dr. Divetia sir has highlighted, FISF released today. So I can say no, absolutely no, but that may be possible reason of the humidifier where the water is a continuous field and it's nobody know the sterility, nobody is doing the cleaning of that, and the humid environment, and maybe for last many months together. So that is a possible, because mucor is from the environment. It is not a normal gut flora like any candida. So yes, possible. As a media fancy terms, even if it is 100 mucor, it will be highlighted because it is easily identified. It's you can say a black kind of the thing. So that has to be highlighted by them. So it is a not so number. It is as a percentage, but yes, other infection, I again summarizing, it is a suboptimal care in the ICU.
Dr. Rao,
Prashant, can I just butt in a little bit over here?
Yeah.
If I may? So, before COVID and steroids and all came in, transplant recipients, okay, they are heavily immunosuppressed. They get that same oxygen from that same water and in those humidifiers and those same nasal cannulae and the same masks. And they are heavily immunosuppressed. Many renal transplant patients are diabetes. In fact, they require a transplant because they've got as a complication of diabetes, But you've never seen mucor like this. So it's not just a question of water in the humidifier, or there is something we are doing, and something maybe about the virus which is creating this. We didn't see mucor in the last phase.
That's what I was about to come to Dr. Rao, because I think the last phase, it's only reported in Gangaram, which has a more of a draining unit from nearby, hospital. So Dr. Rao, I think in Gangaram, it was the first time where they raised up this concern in the media. They have, I think, 20-30 cases of mucormycosis. Did you find any association particularly for that reason?
Our initial study says that it is related to the diabetic control. One thing uniformly that we are seeing in all these patients are they had uncontrolled diabetes and they were not on insulin infusions. So that is one thing that has come out. The rest, of course, we will see. But my gut feel is that we see more of it in the wards than in the ICUs. I mean, we still have to figure out the exact numbers. That's my gut feel, because I don't see that so often in my ICU. The second thing, I agree with you that it is nothing to do with the water and the humidifiers and all. Third thing, the Fungal Society has come out with one thing which goes contrary to the recommendations made by the Ministry of Health and what we have discussed here. And they say that if you have to give steroids, do not give oral steroids, because that contributes to mucormycosis. That is the recommendation of the Fungal Society or the fungal group. I'm not saying they are right or wrong, but that is what they have recommended. That if you give steroids, give it parenteral, systemic.
Okay, so they
don't give oral.
Prashant, I just want to add one word.
Yeah.
Any explanation for that? Have they provided any explanation?
No.
Dr. Rao?
No, they have not.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Mani, you were saying something, sir? Yeah.
I have come across a few mucormycosis, very surprisingly, in young people, and this rhino orbital mucormycosis mode. And our ENT colleagues are also seeing and operating on more than ever before. So I think this is real, whatever be the reasons, but reasons are putative reasons. Of course, the steroid therapy and then excess steroid therapy has been going on in an uncontrolled manner. You see, and then the antibiotic stewardship has gone for a 6. It never was effective. Now we need stewardship for steroids also. In stewardship for tocilizumab and related MABs, okay, there are so many different forms that are being used. I think after the April publication of REMAP-CAP, it has come back to tocilizumab. So while we do not know whether it is really efficacious, this is all in the mix. So many things are now in the mix. And we have stopped doing the usual investigations for bacterial infections. You know, everything is empirical. Now, empirical has a problem. Empirical has a justification, but on day 3, there is no de-escalation. The so-called de-escalation kicks in after a couple of weeks. Now, this must have a fallout. We know nosocomial mucor is described, not just this rhino-ocular. It can appear on the skin also. It can appear in the blood also. Now, those are almost always fatal. These have been described before. They are not new. So I think we must first look at how we are prescribing and whether the stewardship business must expand to all the drugs that are being used as in some form of immunosuppression.
Okay. Dr. Mayank, I think he joined a little late. He was probably having a link issue. Dr. Mayank, there is one question from the delegates who are joining. There is a confusion between 6 milligram of dexamethasone and the vial which comes as 8 milligram. So how you prescribe it? Is it the same thing of 6 milligram of dexamethasone, which is equivalent to 8 milligram of dexamethasone phosphate, or you prescribe 6 milligram out of that 8 milligram vial?
Good evening, all. Thank you, Dr. Prashant. We are usually writing 6 milligram of dexamethasone. So sisters are giving 6 milligram of dexamethasone rather than 8 milligram of dexamethasone phosphate.
Because the ampule comes of 2 ml, which is 8 milligram. So
yeah,
that's the confusion. Sometimes people think whether to give full 8 milligram or to give 6 milligram specifically. While
no, we are giving 6 milligram, and definitely we are getting reasonably good results. And mostly we are using dexamethasone to start with. However, if the patient is worsening or not improving, then we will switch over to methylprednisolone, 40 milligram 3 times a day or so, and then we gradually taper it off.
Okay, I think we covered up almost all questions. Yes.
Yeah.
So I will. Any point, anyone? Dr. Divatia, you want to add some last message?
No, I think we have this pandemic has thrown up now 3 stewardships which we need to do. One is antibiotic stewardship, which we are struggling with anyway. Now we need steroid stewardship, and we also need antifungal stewardship, because already people are talking about giving prophylactic posaconazole. It's impossible to give prophylactic liposomal amphotericin, but people want to give prophylactic posaconazole, and that's going to be the next big problem, because so we need to be really careful. I think, like Dr. Rao said, if we control diabetes, and what's happening is, in ICUs we are able to start insulin infusions and control the blood sugar, but in many of these smaller, the field hospitals and the smaller nursing home sort of things, it is very difficult when you're giving high steroids, and very often people are getting high doses of steroids, to control the blood sugar with oral anti-diabetics, with oral hypoglycemics, or with some doses of insulin which are not monitored frequently, which are not titrated well, and that's creating this problem of uncontrolled blood sugars. And the antibiotics which are being prescribed, quite mega antibiotics are being prescribed, so the combination of these things is giving rise to now why mucor. I still guess the experts still need to figure out why mucor and not some other fungus or not some other bacteria. Maybe all that is happening, but we need to basically, not out of the sheer panic. I think we are just giving one thing after the other, and more is better, and it almost like hitting a hammer to kill an ant. Not that COVID is an ant, but we are using a very big hammer. We need to just stick to the basics, get our basics right, follow the data, follow the evidence, and give good basic intensive care wherever we go. I think.
So I will summarize.
One thing I would like to.
Yeah, Dr. Man.
to bring in knowledge of all panelists that here in Dubai, in Rashid Hospital, we are seeing a lot of Candida non-albicans, Candida krusei, Candida glabrata, Candida parasilosis, and many other Candidas are coming. We have never seen any Mucor cases till now. Although we are not using very high dose steroid, which is being used in India, we are using the 6 milligram twice a day, and then we make it 6 mg OD, and then we taper it down. But a lot of Candida cases are being observed. Say, I would say around 10% of COVID cases develops Candida either in the tracheo, like in the respiratory secretion, or in blood culture or in urine culture. So this could also be a matter of concern in the future. We never know.
Okay, so for the sake of
Can
the
I tell
time, we
something?
will be summarizing, whatever we have discussed, and I think it's very important.
Dr.
message we have
Prashant,
discussed.
sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, Dr. Deepak.
Dr. Shushul want to say something, and then I would like to say something. I'm extremely sorry, sir. I joined a little late because of some technical problem at my end. I apologize to all the panelists for that. But I request Dr. Prashant to give Dr. Sushil want to say something, and then I'd like to have one question.
Yeah.
My side.
Yeah,
Yeah, Dr. Shushita.
yeah, we have handled quite a few many of COVID patients. In the first wave till March, we had treated about 1,700 COVID patients. The superadded infections or the super ICU acquired infections were many. We follow strict antibiotic protocol. We start maybe on big antibiotics, but if the procalcitonin level is less than 1, we stop them, strictly stop them, no antibiotics, till we get a fresh culture or something. In spite of that, we were getting this usual Acinetobacter, this Carbapenemus producing Klebsiella, Carbapenemus producing E. coli, a large number of MSSA, and of course Candida. What we are getting in the cultures, we send cultures routinely, and we're getting them. We have got our first Mucor patient today, coincidentally, first Mucor patients. So that is my feeling about the superadded infections, and definitely that has got to do with we are getting patients from other hospitals who from the first day are getting 3-4 antibiotics along with steroids, higher dose and everything. So that might be the cause that why we are getting so many sort of superadded infections. That's all. Thank you.
Dr. Deepak?
Yeah, so there are a few questions in chat box, and many of the delegates want to ask about the role of inhalational steroids.
We discussed.
This
Dr.
was
Deepak, we
answered.
discussed.
This was
No,
addressed.
it was discussed earlier, but still there are many questions about it. So if in one line, Dr. Nasa or anybody, sir, can summarize, that will be great.
The role of inhalational steroid, as Dr. Mani said, definitely there is a role in subset of patients in the moderate illness, where higher dose of corticosteroid have shown to reduce the progression of the disease, but it's not a very good quality evidence, and further research is required. The dose which they found in the trial was of 1600 milligram per day, which is 800 milligram twice a day of budesonide. That is the trial which has come and shown some benefit, and I think AIMS guideline do have included that into the mild disease.
Actually, I heard when it was discussed, but there are 2-3 questions in chat box. That's why I just wanted to. So now you please summarize and close the thing.
I think there was a question about biomarker for the role of starting steroid or decreasing. That's what we also discussed. So we will summarize that. I think this will be a recorded session. So, the delegates do come up later on and can see the first part of the discussion where we try to include all these things.
Prashant, the short answer to that question would be no.
Yes, the short answer to that question is there is no role of steroid biomarkers to decide to stop or to prolong the duration of the steroid.
There is clinical deterioration of the patient.
Yes, so that is the most important message which we learned from everyone today, that the clinical deterioration is the most important criteria to decide the start of the steroid, which is an oxygen support. So anytime a patient requiring an oxygen in COVID patients, that's the time one should start thinking of oral or IV steroid. The most of the time, the dexamethasone 6 milligram is good enough. A higher dose of steroid, other than what is recommended for non-COVID patients, more than 20 milligram of dexamethasone is not recommended out of the trials. So if you have to use a pulse steroid, it can be of very risk and harm. At present, there is no evidence, good evidence to support that. Duration, most of the patients work well with 10 days of equivalent dose of steroid, either dexamethasone or methylprednisolone. In subset of patients, there may be a role of a longer duration, especially in patients who are critically ill, have high oxygen requirement. But again, it has to be identified and has to be a multidisciplinary decision. Weaning criteria is recommended by everyone, but there is no, though again recovery trial said most of the patient 10 days is sufficient, but a weaning strategy is better. Superinfection is something which we need to be very watchful, because that's what we are observing from the first wave to second or to third wave now. Probably superadded infections are possible, especially with the use of corticosteroids, especially with higher dose or longer duration, especially with the persistent or comorbid illness like diabetes, and even tocilizumab is one of the factors which can add to these superadded infections. So this has to be watchful. No role of inflammatory markers for deciding to start, to continue, or to stop steroid. So that has to be further research on. At present, there is no role. Any other point which I have missed? Probably someone.
No, I just want to, Dr. Deepak, the president is here, the president-elect is here. This may be good time, Dr. Deepak, to initiate a ISCCM study, multicentric ISCCM study, collect data, and give them a protocol and collect data. And I think there will be a strong data collected from India.
Thank you, sir, for your valid suggestion. And our research committee is looking into it, and they are planning to start some study shortly. So,
Prashant, there are 2 or 3 questions. Can I just give one quick answers to 2 or 3 of them?
Yeah, I think we have 1 or 2 minutes, Dr. Deepak. Sir, we have.
Okay, President sir is allowed. Okay. So should we start prophylactic antifungals in high-risk patients? The answer is no.
No.
What is the view on antifibrotics along with steroids? Answer is no.
No.
Okay, so it's a unanimous no. I think.
Less is more. Less is more. Let's be focused on
less is better.
Precision therapy, not a sledgehammer therapy.
Exactly. Now there is another one. I think these questions will be keep on coming. So let's keep our focus for the steroids today.
Baricitinib, yes, there is a good publication. Baricitinib, remdesivir combination is superior to remdesivir alone, but that study did not add steroids.
So that's the important message.
So it doesn't mean that you give all the 3 and whatever you have.
So people do not understand that all 3 can be combined together and to be used in the same patient. No, and I think it's not proven as a replacement for tocilizumab again.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Dr. Deepak.
So on the behalf of Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, I thank you all, especially Dr. Banamare sir, Dr. Rao sir, Dr. Mani sir, Dr. Devatia sir, Dr. Rungta sir, Dr. Bandyopadhyay, Professor Mohan Gurjar, and Dr. Mayank Vats for taking out time from your busy schedule. Side by side, I extend my thanks to Dr. Prashant Nasa for beautifully conducting and moderating this session. So thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the delegates who took time and listened to this.